Colorado is often imagined as a land defined by what rises above the earth. Jagged peaks cutting into the sky, endless pine forests, snowfields glowing under the sun. But long before the mountains became symbols, before maps gave names to rivers and cities, the true story of this land unfolded beneath the surface, hidden from view, carried silently through stone and darkness, where water moved patiently through fractures older than memory, shaping life in ways no skyline ever could. Long before highways crossed valleys and dams bent rivers to human will, unseen springs whispered through limestone chambers and volcanic layers, emerging only where the land allowed them to breathe. And it was these secret waters that determined where people stopped, where they stayed, and where civilizations quietly began. The earliest human footsteps in Colorado did not follow the highest ridges or the widest plains, but the invisible paths of groundwater, learned through observation, instinct, and survival, as nomadic peoples read the land not by sight alone, but by subtle signs, the way certain grasses grew greener even in drought, the way animals gathered at seemingly ordinary rock faces, the way the earth itself exhaled moisture on cold mornings. And over generations, this knowledge hardened into something deeper than science, becoming story, ritual, and reverence, because water here was never guaranteed, never abundant, and never taken lightly. To the Ute, the Apache, and other indigenous nations, springs were not resources to be claimed, but living thresholds, places where the underworld met the sky, where spirits traveled with the flow, and where imbalance could bring famine or fortune. And these waters were protected not by walls or laws, but by memory itself, passed from elder to child as a map written in the mind rather than on paper. As glaciers retreated at the end of the last ice age, they left behind a fractured landscape of sediment and stone, creating aquifers that filled slowly over thousands of years. Reservoirs not of human design, but of geological patience, storing meltwater drop by drop until pressure and time forced it upward through faults, birthing springs that appeared eternal to those who depended on them, yet fragile beyond understanding. When the first European explorers arrived, they saw rivers and assumed abundance, mistaking surface flow for permanence, unaware that many of Colorado's rivers were merely the visible veins of a much deeper circulatory system, one that could not be commanded without consequence. And as settlements formed, towns rose not where land was flattest or views were grandest, but where water emerged reliably from the ground, places like Pueblo and Denver growing not from ambition alone, but from hydrology, each street and structure unknowingly aligned to forces far older than any human plan. Beneath these cities, tunnels were carved, wells sunk, and channels redirected, slowly altering the balance of underground flow. Yet for decades, the water continued to come, reinforcing the illusion of control, while beneath the surface, aquifers adjusted silently, pressure shifting, pathways rerouting, consequences delayed. The gold rush intensified this quiet manipulation as miners chased veins of metal and unknowingly fractured veins of water, draining springs to flood tunnels and diverting groundwater to wash sediment, changing underground routes that had taken millennia to form, and in doing so rewriting the future of entire valleys without ever seeing the full picture. As railroads stitched the state together and agriculture spread across plains that once relied solely on seasonal moisture, water rights became more valuable than land itself, giving rise to legal systems that treated water as property rather than presence, codifying access while ignoring replenishment. And this shift marked a turning point where Colorado's hidden waters began to serve growth instead of guiding it. Yet even as dams rose and reservoirs expanded, much of the state's most important water never entered a lake or pipeline, remaining trapped underground, moving inch by inch through porous rock, feeding springs that few modern residents could name. Springs that once dictated migration routes in seasonal camps, but now sat forgotten behind fences, beneath roads, or sealed beneath concrete, still flowing, still shaping outcomes, unseen. Today, scientists map these aquifers with instruments and models, tracing paths once known only through lived experience, discovering that many of Colorado's underground water systems are far older and slower than assumed, some containing water that fell as snow tens of thousands of years ago, water that cannot be replaced on any human timescale. And this realization introduces an uncomfortable truth that modern consumption is often drawing from a past that cannot be restored, borrowing against a geological history with no mechanism for repayment. Climate change tightens this equation further as snowpacks thin and melt earlier, reducing the surface recharge that feeds aquifers, forcing underground reserves to compensate for losses above. And as pumping increases to meet agricultural and urban demand, pressure drops, springs weaken, and ancient flows alter their course, sometimes disappearing entirely, not with dramatic collapse, but with quiet absence, a trickle fading, until one day it is simply gone. Yet despite all this, most people who live in Colorado rarely think about what lies beneath their feet, unaware that their homes, farms, and cities are supported by a hidden architecture of water whose stability determines everything, from food security to wildfire behavior. And it is in this disconnect that the true tension of Colorado's story emerges. Because while mountains inspire awe, it is water that decides survival, and the most powerful water of all is the kind no one sees, flowing in darkness, indifferent to borders, patient beyond generations, waiting to reveal, through scarcity or collapse, what was ignored when it was still abundant. Colorado's hidden waters do not announce themselves. They are patient, silent architects of the land, moving through fractures in stone, looping beneath valleys, and surfacing only when pressure, gravity, and time align. And it is in these subterranean veins that the most extraordinary stories of human ingenuity, desperation, and survival quietly unfold. For early settlers learned that a single well or spring could dictate the success or failure of an entire community, and those who understood these currents could shape the future, while those who ignored them faced ruin. Yet knowledge of these systems was never fully shared, passed along in whispers, maps with cryptic markings, or oral tradition that demanded respect for both the water and the land. And when miners and engineers arrived with pickaxes, shovels, and blueprints, they often failed to grasp the subtle interplay between geology and hydrology, drilling wells that dried within years, redirecting flows that nourished wildlife, and inadvertently altering the very aquifers that fed the springs which generations of indigenous peoples had honored and depended upon, as if each human intervention nudged an invisible web. And over decades, these hidden shifts began to accumulate, creating consequences too diffuse to see until a town experienced a failing well, a parched field, or a spring that no longer sang. Explorers of the 19th and 20th centuries chronicled rivers and surface lakes, but it was the underground networks that truly dictated settlement patterns, determining where agriculture could flourish, where livestock thrived, and where towns could survive drought. And yet, even today, the maps rarely show the full picture, as aquifers are not neat lines on paper, but a complex system of porous rock, caverns, fissures, and sediments, moving in ways that can only be predicted with careful observation, patience, and scientific modeling. And this hidden labyrinth is not static. Seismic shifts, mining, construction, and climate change constantly modify flow paths, creating a living network that responds to both natural and human pressures, sometimes in unexpected and irreversible ways. In the San Luis Valley, one of the largest high-altitude aquifers in the world, water that fell as snow during the last ice age still flows underground, feeding springs that sustain ecosystems and communities, a reminder that every drop is both ancient and vital. And when modern demands pull too heavily, the landscape reacts subtly at first, a reduction in spring output, a shift in vegetation, a change in animal migration, but over time, the cumulative effect becomes undeniable, revealing the true cost of ignoring what cannot be seen, the invisible debt humanity owes to forces older than any civilization. The tension between visibility and invisibility is central to Colorado's story, for while people celebrate the grandeur of mountains, the drama of rivers, and the spectacle of snow-capped peaks, it is the unseen that carries life and shapes destiny. And understanding this requires a shift in perspective, a willingness to look below the surface, to trace the pulse of water through rock and soil, to follow it into the caverns, springs, and aquifers that act as arteries beneath the land, carrying with them secrets of climate cycles, migration, and survival strategies that are often older than human memory itself. The narrative of Colorado is thus a tale of duality, what is visible, celebrated, and conquered above ground, and what is hidden, patient, and indispensable below. And within this duality lies both wonder and warning. For those who study the springs, wells, and underground channels, come to realize that mastery of water is never absolute, that control is temporary, and that the most profound power resides in understanding limits, timing, and the ancient patience of nature, a lesson that resonates not only for historians, geologists, and hydrologists, but for anyone who drinks from a tap, farms the soil, or lives within the state, unknowingly dependent on networks formed in silence over millennia. As cities expanded, engineers began to construct reservoirs, canals, and pipelines, attempting to harness surface flows while largely ignoring the underground sources that first determined settlement. And although these systems brought prosperity and growth, they also created a fragile illusion of abundance, masking the slow depletion and shifting of aquifers, the drying of springs that had once been constants, and the invisible fractures that now carry consequences for the future. Consequences that cannot be fixed by policy alone, but require a deeper, almost spiritual recognition of the hidden veins that sustain life. Even modern science has only begun to appreciate the complexity and scale of these subterranean systems, using satellite imaging, isotopic analysis, and flow modeling to trace paths that ancient peoples navigated intuitively. Yet every discovery seems to underscore how little control humans truly have, and how easily balance can be disrupted by extraction, construction, and climatic change, reinforcing the lesson that true understanding requires humility, patience, and a willingness to observe rather than impose. For in Colorado, the land's oldest stories are not written on peaks or valleys, but inscribed invisibly beneath, flowing silently through time, shaping civilizations, dictating the rhythms of life, and reminding all who inhabit it that water, though hidden, is the ultimate arbiter of survival, growth, and legacy.